Hey everybody, it's Jordan here with Major Hi-Fi and we're back with another review, this time of the brand new HD620S from Sennheiser. Look, Sennheiser needs no introduction, from the HD600 series to the HD800 series, all the way down to the 500 series, and then the true wireless offerings. Just everything that Sennheiser offers is always really great, so they need no introduction at all. And today we're going to discuss a bunch of those, specifically the HD600 line, as we review the HD620S, the new closed-back variant of the HD600 line. So people are going to be asking, did Sennheiser come up with the closed-back version of the HD600? And we're going to answer that today. So let's jump in. In the box, you've got the HD620S headphone, a 1.8 meter cable terminating in a 1/8 inch jack, a 1/8 inch to 1/4 inch jack adapter, a quick start guide, and a carrying pouch. So through its name, we can deduce that the HD620S is part of the HD600 line, though the design is actually more similar to the HD560S. Using similar design language to the HD500 series, it features a plastic and metal headband that loops into the also metal and plastic ear cups. On those ear cups are a really thick and comfortable protein leather, and that's also on the inside of the headband as well. I guess there is a little bit of clamping force on these headphones, but overall I found these really comfortable for long listening periods. Comfort is something that Sennheiser really prioritizes on their reference headphones. They want people to be able to listen to these for a long time while working or listening, and I found these a joy to have on my head. My only gripe with the build is that the cable connector that goes into the headphone, it goes deep into the ear cup, the left ear cup, and it has a twist lock mechanism. And I'm mixed on this type of feature. On one hand, it is really nice to have your cable secured on the headphone, and I do like that Sennheiser is modernizing their approach to the cables and keeping just one connector on the inside, as opposed to the HD600 series, which generally has a dual connector to the headphones. I found that it was just tough to find that you got your connection stable. When I first listened to the headphones, I was like, what is going on? Like, these really don't sound good at all. And it was just because I wasn't getting a good enough connection inside the headphones. So it makes it a little bit tricky at first, but it really is not a big deal. With all that said, the build of this headphone is really, really good. It feels durable, it's comfortable, it kind of checks all the boxes. Yeah, the cable is a little annoying, but overall, it's really good. So when it comes to design, let me not bury the lead. This is a closed-back headphone, and it's the first closed-back entrant into the HD600 series. People have been asking for a closed-back HD600, and this is trying to be that. At least in my opinion, it is. And the first thing that makes me think this is just the name itself, the 820S being the closed-back version of the HD800, and maybe the HD620S being the closed-back version of the HD600. And later on, we'll get into a comparison of all of the HD600 variant headphones, including the 600s, the 650s, the 660S2. But for now, we'll stick to talking about design. Now, another distinguishing factor of the HD620S from the rest of the HD600 line is that it's using a 120 ohm dynamic driver, which is different than the 300 ohm dynamic drivers that you'll find in the 600, 650, and 660S. For a closed-back pair of headphones that you might want to take on the go or use in production scenarios where you don't have like a super high-end amplifier that can power a very hard-to-drive headphone, I think this is a great thing. Especially with the proliferation of dongles, this just makes this a much more portable headphone. And yeah, well, 120 ohms isn't the easiest to drive either, but it's significantly easier to drive than the rest of the HD600 series, so I'm really happy to see this. Now, without further ado, let's get into the sound of these headphones, starting with the bass. I found the bass response on the 620S to be really balanced and linear. There wasn't a ton of lower end extension, but for a reference set of headphones, I think this is perfectly appropriate. And compared to the rest of the HD600 line, which we'll get into in a little bit, this is in character with it. So I think that this is a really good low end. It's kind of a more liquidy approach to bass, so listening to hip-hop tracks like Ooh La La by Run the Jewels, I got a nice sense of smoothness and, again, liquidy kind of sense to the bass. And this was really good. It was really enjoyable to listen to, but most importantly for reference users, it is linear and it doesn't just go thump, thump, thump. There is a nice smoothness for casual listeners and audiophiles as well. Now, again, with the HD600 series, we're used to really forward vocals, and I think we're getting that here with the HD620S too, though they're not quite as in your face as the open back variants. It's a little bit more balanced, again, more neutral, and I think this is, again, really good for a reference leaning headphone. You still get that really smooth and nice vocal performance that the HD600 line is known for. I listened to Joni Mitchell's Carrie, and it sounded really, really good. And it's not just the vocals that sound good in the mid-range. Separation is really good. Instrumentals are really clear, and imaging in the mid-range is really nice. So everything's getting its own space to do things. And like I said, the mid-range is a little bit more balanced, and I don't think this comes from reducing or recessing the mid-range in any way, but I think this comes from just a more refined sound in general, which brings us to the treble response. So the treble is where I found the sound of the HD620S to take the biggest departure from the rest of the HD600 series. I found treble to be a lot more forward, which isn't a bad thing actually, because Sennheiser has been known to have a bit of a veiled sound, the Sennheiser veil as people call it. I don't really always find there to be a veiled sound to the 600 series, but that said, this definitely does not have a veil. I think the treble is, again, really linear. I found a really good example of this to be King Crimson's Starless, which has a lot of different cymbal hits, a more sibilant singer, but it's also just a more dynamically challenging song with strong bass all the way up to mid-range and treble. And I found the dynamic range to be really well covered and the treble to be really well extended. I found the treble to be really resolving and not overly smooth, but again, it stays with that smooth signature that it's going for, but it's not veiled in any way. It's not recessed in any way. It's right there. So overall, the sound is going to be really good for reference listeners, people using it for production, or people who just want a really balanced, neutral listening experience. All right, so let's get into some comparisons now, and we'll start with the HD660S2, one of the more recent additions to the HD600 line. Now, while sound turns out to be similar, and these are clearly in the same family of headphones, the actual built-in design is quite different between the 660S2 as well as pretty much the entire HD600 line. Now, like I said, the design and build of the headphone is really different than the rest of the HD600 line, and this couldn't be any more apparent than on the 660S2. The 660S2 has that classic HD600 line look of the headband that goes straight into the fully open ear cups, dual connector cable, velour ear pads, and a 300 ohm dynamic driver. So these are all significant changes on the HD620S, which looks to be more nimble, easier to drive, and just a more portable device. Build quality is really solid on both. The 660S2 introduced a higher quality build to the 600 line that the 650 and 600 also followed suit on. You can remember this update when the logo moved from the top to the side and we lost that kind of floor-looking design on the HD650, more for a gray look. And even though the build is quite different, I find them to be on par in terms of build quality. I think they're all solidly built headphones. You're not going to have any problems with the 620S or the 660S2. In terms of sound, I find these two headphones to be similar but different. The 660S2 goes for a little bit more of a relaxed sound signature, a little bit more refined, a little bit more audiophile sounding, whereas the 620S is, again, more reference. And this is most apparent in the treble response. The 620S is just that much more forward in the treble to make things a little bit more clearer, a little more crisp. And this will be really good for that reference listener. That said, the treble on the 660S2 is not bad, it's just a lot more relaxed. Now moving backwards, the bass response on both headphones are quite similar. They're very linear. I'd say the 660S2 is maybe a little bit more warm, but overall I found them very similar. Extension isn't super great, But again, for what these headphones are going for and that Sennheiser signature sound, that's what you're getting. That's what you're looking for. So it's not really a weakness. It's just in character for what these headphones sound like. And then the mid-range is just a little bit more forward on the HD660S2. The 620S is just a little bit more natural sounding to me, whereas the 660S2 is more forward. So I think that if you like a more vocal forward type of listening experience, the HD660S2 is definitely more up that alley. But if you're looking for a reference close back, the 620S is just really good. Now comparing it to the HD650, it's the same build and design notes as I had for the HD660S2. It's just a totally different build and design. But again, the sound is very close. I find the 650 to sound very similar to the HD660S2, but maybe a little bit less refined, and maybe the build quality is not quite the same as the 660S2. But here you'll find a stronger bass response that goes a little bit deeper, but it is a little bit slower. It's not quite as nimble as the bass on the 620S. And I think this comes from a more extended mid-bass region. Things are just a little bit boomier, a little heftier here, and that makes for an overall warmer headphone. And I think that's pretty commonly addressed in the 650. The mid-range, likewise, is very warm. You get a very forward vocal, maybe the most forward of all the HD600 headphones. People who listen to a lot of acoustic music or folk music, that type of thing, might like this sound a lot. Separation is still really good, but that forwardness really puts you into that mid-range. And then in terms of the high end, this is where the Sennheiser veil is most apparent across the HD600 line. Again, to my ears, I don't really hear that. I think the treble is still pretty clear and solid, but to some people, it might seem like the treble takes a little bit of a back seat to the mid-range and low end. So if that's the sound signature you like, then the 650 is unique in that, and that might be the one you want to choose. The 620S is, again, more neutral, a bit brighter sounding in comparison to the 650. So if you're looking for a reference sound, you're really going to be looking to compare the 620S with the HD600. Now, many people, including myself, are going to consider the HD620S to be a closed-back 600. And sound-wise, I found this to be very much the case. Bass sounds almost identical on the two headphones. Again, they're punchy and they're quick, but they're not super deep, but very reference level. When it comes to mid-range, I think the 600 is a little bit more forward and a little bit clearer sounding, and I think this comes from just the nature of the open back headphone being able to resolve just a little bit better than the 620S. But I find them very comparable, and for a closed back headphone, one of the better mid-ranges that I've heard on the 620S. So they definitely are falling from the same tree, and it's nice to hear. And then finally, the treble between the two. I would say the 620S has a more forward treble response, but the 600 has a more resolving treble. And again, this comes from just the nature of a closed back versus an open back headphone. The resolving capabilities of an open back headphone are just going to be greater. And that's just the nature of the design of the two. But that said, the 620S is still really good. And again, has a really balanced reference sound signature that the 600 is famous for. So with all that said, is the HD620S really the new closed-back HD600? For my money, I'd say yeah. I think Sennheiser finally hit the nail on the head with a closed-back variant for the HD600 series. They listened to fans. They made a headphone that's easier to drive, more portable, good isolation, very comfortable, and also has that HD600 sound that people are used to. So this is no slouch entering the line. And I think my favorite thing about this headphone is that it's not outdoing anything. It's not competing with anything in the line. It's simply just taking a new space in the line. It complements the line. Every headphone brings its own unique flavor to the 600 series, and this one's main claim to fame is that it's a closed back, but that it does everything so well. I don't think it's trouncing any of the existing HD600 headphones. It just fits into the line perfectly. So thank you for sticking with us for this review. If you're interested in the HD620S, you can find them at Audio 46, and we'll be back next time with another review.